What are the purpose of legal descriptions? Well, they're used to describe a property in a way that uniquely identifies it from any other parcel, like a fingerprint. There's only one of them. The survey is a drawing of the parcel that shows its boundary lines. Types of legal descriptions: you have meets and bounds, government survey system, and lot and block. Meets and bounds, that's the oldest type of legal description. Meets refers to distance and bounds refers to direction. Now you may get a question that asks you, what does meets refer to or what does bounds refer to? I made up a little ditty to help me remember when I was going for the state test. And it goes like, I'm bound to run in the right direction, bound direction, in a 5-meter race. Meters is how long or the distance that I'm running. Now, the description starts with a point of beginning. It's an exact reference starting point. You start at the point of beginning, and that first boundary is determined from the legal description. You're reading the legal description. It indicates the direction and distance to go to that first corner parcel, and then so on until you get back to the point of beginning. The corners of the parcel and the point of beginning are identified with fixed markers called a monument. The description by meets and bounds begins with either north or south, and it's followed by a number of degrees up to 90 degrees. If you'll notice, it's a circle. A circle is 360 degrees. It's divided into 4 quadrants. Each quadrant is 90 degrees. The direction that follows the numbers of degrees indicates whether the direction is east or west of due north-south. So look at north 45 degrees east. If you had a pencil and you pointed the lead up to north, and you went what you think is 45 degrees, which is about halfway, or is halfway, to 90 degrees, you would take your pencil point and turn it to the right. So it would be pointing to north 45 degrees east. The most common question I see about this is they'll ask you what is the opposite of, for instance, north 45 degrees east. You can draw a straight line across it and look and see, or you can just very simply change the N to an S, so north to south, leave the amount of degrees the same, 45, 45, and change the E to a W, so east to west. So the opposite of north 45 degrees east is south 45 degrees west. The description by the government survey system is based on a grid system, not used in the original 13 states. So you might want to put that in your memory just in case that's a question on an exam. They didn't use it in the original 13 states. The beginning reference is the intersection of the north and south line. That's called the principal meridian. Up and down, principal meridian. East and west, horizontal, is called the baseline. There are 37 principal meridian baselines throughout the U.S. So as they cross, there's 37 of those crosses throughout the U.S., which our government survey system is based on. Range lines. So every 6 miles from the principal meridian going outward is what is called a range line. There are 6 miles between each one of them. Okay, they result in a 6-mile vertical north and south strip called a range. They're numbered beginning at the principal meridian and going outward. 1, 2, 3, 4 accordingly. And then if it's going west of the principal meridian, it's west. Goes east of the principal meridian, it's east. So if you look at the very first 2 6-mile strips, the one east and the one west of the principal meridian, notice they're both R1W on the west, R1E on the right. Then it goes R2W, R2E, and so on. Townships are just like the ranges or the township tier lines. Okay, every 6 miles is a horizontal east-west township line every 6 miles parallel to the baseline. Okay, they're numbered the same, but because they're called townships or tiers, they start with the letter T. From the baseline, the first one out's 1, second one out's 2, whether it's north or south, and so on. So if you look at that, the first two strips, one north of the baseline and the one south of the baseline, is T1N, T1S. Adding the tier lines forms a grid pattern. They are series of squares 6 miles square called townships. Each township contains 36 square miles. They're 6 by 6, and they're identified by the township tier and range. So if you look at the picture there and we identify Township 2 South, Range 3 East, find T2S, R3E, and that is your square, your township. Here is an example of the principal meridian, baseline, and townships. Notice on this one, they have marked out Township 2 South, Range 2 East. It's the little blue square. 6 miles by 6 miles, and it contains 36 sections. So each township has 36 sections, and each section is 1 square mile or 640 acres. You're going to have to remember the 640 acres because they won't give you that information, but they may test you on something that requires you know that information. Now the sections are numbered in an S pattern beginning in the northeast upper right corner of the township, starting with section number 1. The sections are numbered from 1 in the northeast corner and then consecutively to the west through section 6. Then they drop down and go 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, drop down, so forth into an S pattern until we got 36. And here's what the sections look like once they're numbered. See, it goes 1 to 6, kind of backwards in the S pattern, 7 through 12, and then back. Just like a S pattern, like a snake. Here are some additional measurements that you're going to want to remember. Again, you'll be quizzed on them, I'm sure, and they're not going to give you this information. You'll have to have it memorized. So, for example, an acre is 43,560 square feet, and a mile is 5,280 feet in length. A benchmark is a permanent reference mark affixed to an iron post or brass marker used to establish elevations. All right, you're likely to get a question giving you a legal description and asking you to determine how many acres are in the legal description. Looking at this, you think, oh my word, this is so hard, but it's really not. All you got to do is remember there's 640 acres in a section. And then whatever portion of the legal description, which is the southwest 1/4 through that northwest 1/4 part, all you're going to do is take the number 640 and divide it by the denominator of each fraction. So 640 divided by 4, divided by 4, divided by 4, divided by 4 means this legal description only has 2.5 acres in it. It's that simple. Lot and block is used only where plat maps have been recorded. Platted subdivisions are divided into large area called blocks. Blocks are divided into lots. Lots are numbered, but blocks, they can either be numbered or lettered. So here's another little silly memory crutch that I got that I used to get me through this. If I was to be asked a question on an exam, whether it be in the course or state exam, and they wanted to know, for example, which one of the following is only indicated by numbers. Lots, blocks, this or that. Now, unless I deal in this every day, I'm not going to remember, so I had to have a way to remember which one is only indicated by numbers. So I had a student in an exam prep class tell me, she said, close your eyes, Marlene, picture a wooden baby block. I said, okay, I do. She goes, does it have both numbers and letters on those baby blocks? I said, yes. She says, well, you have your answer, so blocks have numbers and letters. So that left lots to be the one that was only numbered. You ask me now, all I got to do is think about that, and I know it. Elevations must be measured if air lots above the surface or the subsurface right below the datum are used to describe and convey. Datum defined as sea level at New York Harbor. Making use of permanent benchmarks are established throughout the United States. Permanent reference marks affixed to an iron post or brass marker are used to establish the elevations. Monuments mark the surface measurements between the points. Survey preparation includes both legal description and survey sketch. A less precise analysis found in the improvement location certificate may be used. The legal description must be included by reference or transcribed exactly as written to avoid future problems over incorrect boundaries. The characteristics of land are both economical and physical. Economical characteristics of land include scarcity, improvements, permanence of the investment, and area preference, also known as situs. Physical characteristics of the land include immobility, indestructibility, and non-homogeneity, which is uniqueness. The bundle of legal rights includes the rights of possession, control, enjoyment, exclusion, and disposition. That can be remembered by the acronym DEEP-C. What is the definition of real property? Real property or real estate means any interest or estate in land and any interest in business enterprises or business opportunities. This includes trees, vineyards, mineral rights, etc. It does not include cemetery lots, nor the renting of mobile home lots, recreational vehicle lots, mobile home parks, or travel park. Real estate includes the land as well as all things permanently attached or annexed to the land, both by nature and by humans. Real property includes the interests, benefits, and rights that are automatically included in the ownership of unimproved land and real estate. All right, so what are the physical components of land? You have surface rights, subsurface rights, and air rights. Your surface rights include land and water rights, which you have two types of water rights. You have riparian and littoral. Your subsurface rights are referred to as mineral rights. That's all the goodies under the dirt. And then your air rights involve the space above your property up into what the municipality allows. So what are the difference between riparian rights and littoral rights? Riparian rights are associated with land abutting moving water, like banks of a river or stream. The water's flowing in a direction. Littoral rights are associated with land that's abutting tidal bodies of waters, big bodies like oceans and seas, ponds and lakes, and the water's not flowing, it's not going in a direction. The way I remembered the difference between these two for the test is I thought RRR, LLL. Riparians like a river rushing, littorals like a lazy lake. Now, a lot of times when they formulate these questions, they want to use distractors. Do not get mixed up when it comes to oceans and seas and think it's riparian because the river has a, not the river, the ocean has a current. Oceans and seas have currents. They're not. They're littoral. They're big and lazy. Fixtures. Fixtures was personal property now permanently attached to or made part of the real property. There's an acronym to help you remember that. It's called MARIA. Method or degree of attachment, adaptation of the item, relationship or agreement of the parties, intent of the parties, and annexation. An appurtenance is a right or privilege associated with real property in some way, such as a parking space in a multi-unit building, an easement, water rights, and is normally conveyed to the new owner when the property is sold. There are two basic types of property. You have real property and personal property. The word realty is where real property comes from. Personal property is also known as chattel or personalty. Now, real property becomes personal property by act of severance, and personal property becomes real property by attachment. So an example of that would be if I had a 100-acre Christmas tree farm and I'm getting ready to list it and my Christmas trees are still on the ground. I haven't cut them down yet and I list the property. The Christmas trees that's in the property, in the ground, are part of the real property and must be sold with it. However, if I cut down the Christmas trees and I pile them up on the side and get ready to have the trucks come and take them to market, then I list it, they're personal property because they've been severed. Personal property becoming real property by attachment, the example for that would be I'm going to remodel my bathroom and I want a jacuzzi tub. So I go to Home Depot and I purchase the one I like. Right now it's personal property. They put it in the back of my truck. It's still personal property. I take it, I put it in the garage, it sits there a week. It's personal property. I call the plumber to drag it through the house, down the hall, take it to the bathroom. The moment he attaches that tub to the pipe in the bathroom, that's when it becomes a fixture and part of the real property. Personal property, remember they refer to it a lot of times as chattel, especially in your questions, are movable items such as a chair or a sofa. Embellments, that's like fruit off a tree. Annual plantings of crops or grains, vegetables or fruit. Items of real property that can be personal property by acts of severance. Items of personal property that can become real property by annexation, such as construction materials, and factory-built homes, including manufactured homes that can be personal property unless permanently affixed to the land. Trade fixtures include property attached to the structure, but used in the course of business, and can be personal property if removed by the tenant and the premises are returned to the original condition before the lease expires, or real property if left behind by the tenant. The landlord can acquire this type of property by accession. A freehold estate lasts for an indeterminable length of time. Fee simple is the highest estate recognized by law. Fee simple defeasible is an estate that is qualified because it is subject to the occurrence or non-occurrence to a specified event. A life estate is based on the lifetime of the life of a tenant or someone else. Pure ATV. Freehold estate. Fee simple is the most comprehensive. It's absolute and complete ownership. It can be inherited. It's also referred to as fee or fee simple absolute. The owner has the power to use, dispose, or descend to heirs. The other freehold estate is a life estate. Property is owned for the period of a lifetime. The owners or some other designated person. A conventional life estate is created by a person who holds title. When the life estate ends, the property is either an estate in reversion, where it goes back to the original grantor, or is given to remaindermen, someone who the original grantor has named. Legal life estates are created by law. If a homestead is owned by one person and they die, their surviving spouse gets a life estate. When the legal life estate ends, the property goes to the surviving children in fee simple. Homestead. You have the right to homestead your principal permanent residence in Florida. There are protection and benefits. Protection of the family, like the legal life estate we just spoke of. Protection of the homestead from forced sales. What that means is, now if you don't pay your mortgage, your property taxes, your homeowners association, those things, they can foreclose on you and force you to sell your homestead. But, for example, if you have run up a hospital bill, credit cards, things such as that, boats, student loans, they can't force you to sell your homestead. That's what's protected. There are tax exemptions up to $50,000 from your assessed value. There are size restrictions of a protected homestead. It's 160 acres outside the city and a half acre within the city. And then there's some personal property protection of $1,000. Sole and concurrent ownership. Inseveralty means that the property is held by one person, either sole ownership or severed ownership. Concurrent ownership means two or more persons own the property at the same time, and there are three types. There's tenancy in common, joint tenancy, and tenancy by the entireties. Tenancy in common, that's for two or more people. They can acquire title at the same or different times. They have undivided interest, meaning they have interest in the whole property no matter what financial interest they share. They all have the same 100% availability to the property. Now, they can have equal or unequal shares of ownership, which is your financial interest. And with tenancy in common, that's the only one that can be willed. The heirs are going to inherit. There's no such thing as right of survivorship when you're tenants in common. Joint tenancy. This one has the right of survivorship, meaning that the share of a co-owner that dies means that it's going to go to the surviving co-owners. It doesn't go to heirs. Joint tenancy cannot be willed. And in order to have joint tenancy, you have to have four unities of possession, interest, title, and time. Undivided possession, everybody gets use of the whole property. They have to have equal financial ownership interest. So if there's three of them, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Everybody has to be on the title at the same time, and everybody has to buy the property at the same time. Everything's done in unison. There also has to be specific wording in the deed that provides for the survivorship. Termination of joint tenancy. A joint tenancy can be terminated by death of all but one joint tenant, who then owns the property in severalty. Conveyance of a joint tenant's interest, but only as to the interest if there were more than two joint tenants originally, or partition. That's the legal action to force the division or sale of the property. Partition, again, is the legal action to force the division or sale of the property. Community property, currently recognized by 9 states, is property acquired during the marriage that is not separate property and requires agreement of both spouses to be conveyed. Separate property is property owned by one spouse before marriage or acquired by one spouse during marriage by gift, inheritance, or with the proceeds of a separate property. On the death of a spouse, that spouse's half of the community property is distributed according to the deceased will or by state law. Tenancy by entirety must have the 4 units of PIT, which is available only to spouses and which carries the right of survivorship. Property held by a tenancy of the entireties can be conveyed only by both spouses. Alabama does not recognize joint tenancy by the entireties, and therefore we recognize husband and wife as tenants in common. Each is free to dispose of this ownership interest. Tenancy at will is a lease agreement with a beginning date but no fixed termination date. It's considered a tenancy without specific term, and the notice to terminate is set in statute. Week to week is 7 days. Month to month is 15, not 30. Notice it's 15. Leasehold estates. That's an estate for years, also known as a tenancy for years. It has a specific starting date and an ending date, designated period. We start this day, we end this day. It's created by written lease agreement, and it establishes the tenant's interest in the property, but it does not convey legal title. Now, tenancy at sufferance, that's when a tenant stays in possession of a property beyond the ending date without the landlord's consent. It's considered a tenant holdover. If with written consent of the landlord, then it becomes a tenancy at will. An encumbrance is a claim, charge, or liability that attaches to real estate. A lien is a charge against property that provides security for a debt or obligation of a property owner. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, are private limitations on the use of the land. Easements, that's the right to use the portion of owner's land for a specific purpose. It does not convey ownership, possession. Dominant tenement benefits from the easement, which runs over the servient tenant. You have four types of easements. You have easement appurtenant, easement in gross, easement by prescription, and easement by necessity. Easement appurtenant involves an adjacent parcel of land, talking about landlocked properties. A landlocked property is a piece of property that the owner cannot get to unless he crosses somebody else's land. Okay? Easement in gross benefits a business or an individual entity. Most of us all have easement and grosses on our property. It's the utility easement. It's the easement where the utility company's allowed to come and fix their lines or cables or whatever without having to get our permission. Easement by prescription is where someone has used a pathway, if you will, for 20 years, open, continuous, uninterrupted use, and now somebody's going to try and stop them. That's an easement by prescription. Those have to be court ordered. An easement by necessity is the same thing as easement appurtenant. It's for landlocked property, but it has to be court ordered. So the first two are by gentleman's agreement. It doesn't involve getting the court involved. The second two is done by court order. An easement is terminated when the need for it no longer exists, when the owner of either the dominant or servient tenement becomes the owner of both, when the owner of the dominant tenement releases the right of the easement to the owner of the servient tenement, if the easement is abandoned, or by the non-use of a prescriptive easement. A license is a privilege to enter the land of another for a specific purpose. It differs from an easement because it can be canceled by the owner. If given orally or informally, it is considered to be a license, not an easement. License ends with the death of either party or with the sale of the land. Other potential encumbrances, there's two general categories of restrictions, government restrictions and private restrictions. Both have several subcategories of restrictions and limitations. Government restrictions can be remembered by the acronym PEAT: police power, eminent domain, taxation, property, and escheat. Police power is zoning ordinances, building codes, and health ordinances. Eminent domain is through just compensation and condemnation. Taxation is our property taxes. Escheat provides for the government to take the property of an owner who dies intestate, which means without a will, and has no known heirs. Inverse condemnation. When the taking of a property occurs through condemnation, the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution requires that the owner be given just compensation. A property owner may claim compensation under the inverse condemnation if an adjacent public land use diminishes the value of the owner's property, but the property has not been condemned for public use. Encroachments, that's unauthorized use of another's property. The fence or the garage is located beyond the boundary, and after 7 years it's considered an implied easement. A condominium owner holds a fee simple title to airspace of a unit. as well as an undivided share in the remainder of the building and land, known as common elements, which may be referenced in what are called horizontal property acts. Common elements are owned by condominium unit owners as tenants in common. The condominium is administered by a homeowners association of unit owners that may decide to hire an outside property management firm. Maintenance of common elements is funded by the fees charged to each unit owner. Cooperatives. That's a multifamily building owned by a corporation. Unit owners purchase shares of stock. Stock ownership entitles purchaser to a proprietary lease and the right to occupy. Property taxes are assessed on each unit. Owners can deduct real estate taxes and mortgage interest. And shareholders pay a pro rata share of the property taxes, and the corporation pays the tax bill. A trust is a legal arrangement in which property is transferred by the trustor, the person creating the trust, to a trustee, to be held for the identified beneficiary. The trustee acts as a fiduciary in carrying out the wishes of a trustor. In a land trust, the beneficiary is also known as a trustor, but the public record will not identify the beneficiary. A partnership is an association of two or more persons who carry on business for profit as co-owners in a general or limited partnership, as provided by state law. In a general partnership, all partners participate in the operation and management, and partners share full liability for business losses and obligations. A limited liability company, LLC, may be permitted by state law and offers its members the benefits of a limited liability of a corporation, the tax advantages of a partnership, and a flexible management structure. A limited partnership has both general partners and limited partners. The general partners, they run the business. Limited partners, they do not participate in running the business and are liable for business losses only up to the amount of an individual's investment.